When you hear the word cult, your mind probably jumps straight to the shocking headlines, right? The wild stories. But the real story, it's rarely about monsters and victims. It's about psychology. And once you understand the mechanics of how this stuff works, you start to see that it's a system that's way more subtle and way more common than most of us ever think. So listen to this. That's a quote from Sarah Edmondson, and she spent more than 10 years in the group Nixium. It's a pretty chilling warning, isn't it? Because it just shatters that first defense we all have, that thought of, oh, that would never be me. But the truth is, this whole process, it doesn't target weakness. It targets our most basic, universal human needs. So, how does it all start? Well, it's not with some weird ritual in a dark room, not at all. It starts with an irresistible offer. The way into one of these high-control groups is almost always a solution to a very common, very human problem. Yeah, here's the thing. Nobody joins a cult. People join interesting groups that promise to give them something they're missing. Nixim, for example, didn't put up a sign that said, "Join our cult." No, it was an executive success program. When Sarah Edmondson walked in, she was in her late 20s, feeling totally adrift, asking herself, what am I even doing here? What's my purpose? And Nixim was right there with an answer. A quick fix. Recruiters are always on the lookout for people who are in some kind of transition or feeling vulnerable. But look, we're not talking about character flaws here. We're talking about life. A bad breakup, losing a loved one, changing careers. Anyone who's looking for a little more connection or meaning in their life is a potential target. Okay, so once they get you in the door, the first tactic they use is something called love bombing. Just imagine being showered with praise, with attention, with affection. It makes you feel seen, understood, like you've finally found your people. And that intense feeling of belonging, it's intoxicating. And it's designed to do one thing, lower your critical defenses. And at the dead center of this web of belonging, there is always one figure, the leader. And this person isn't just a guide. No, their personality is the engine that drives the entire group, and they demand absolute loyalty and control. Psychologists have a term for these leaders, traumatizing narcissists. Basically, individuals whose narcissistic traits are so extreme, they actually cause psychological trauma to the people around them. And what's really fascinating here is how all these traits work together. That big, grandiose charm, it's just a mask for a complete lack of empathy. They demand total control because, deep down, they're incredibly paranoid. And because there's zero accountability, their power is absolute. And this quote from psychoanalyst Dan Shaw just hits the nail on the head. It really illustrates the core dynamic. It is not about lifting the follower up. It's about breaking them down. The whole point is to erase your individual identity so you can be remolded into the perfect object for whatever the leader needs. Okay, let's dive into this. How does that transformation actually happen? It's not magic. It's not brainwashing in the way you see in movies. It's a systematic process, a very well-defined psychological playbook that's used to completely remake a person's identity. Researchers have broken it down into these 4 stages. First, you're softened up, isolated from your old friends, your family. Then comes compliance, where you start acting the part, doing what everyone else is doing. Pretty soon, that leads to internalization, where you actually start to believe it. And finally, you get consolidation. And at that point, the group isn't just something you're in, it's who you are. So, a key method for that first softening up stage is what the psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton called milieu control. And that's just a fancy term for total information control. In Jonestown, for example, Jim Jones cut off all contact with the outside world. And when the only reality you see and hear is the one the group creates for you, this us against them mentality, well, it's pretty much inevitable. Then comes loading the language. The group makes up its own jargon, its own little insider phrases. And these are what you call thought-terminating cliches. They're designed to sound really profound, but what they actually do is shut down independent thought. If you've got a simple, prepackaged answer for every complex question, well, you never have to actually think for yourself. And that's how you speed up that move from just going along with it to truly believing it. And all of this leads to a system that makes you distrust your own mind. This is doctrine over person. If you feel even a tiny flicker of doubt, you're taught that it's not the doctrine that's wrong, it's you. Your doubt is a sign of your own spiritual failure. Your gut instinct, your intuition, gets redefined as the enemy. And this whole process is often supercharged by physical means. A lot of these groups use sleep deprivation. They'll limit your rest to just 4 or 5 hours a night. Now, this isn't just about making people tired. It's a form of neurological warfare. It literally shuts down the part of your brain that handles critical thinking, and it ramps up your emotional center, which makes you way, way more susceptible. So we've seen the playbook from the outside looking in. But what keeps someone locked in, even when things start to get really bad? To understand that, we have to look at the powerful psychological forces that are playing out inside the follower's own mind. Let's start with a really strange question. Why is it that the more we sacrifice for something, the more we tend to value it, even if it's causing us pain? The answer is a wild psychological concept called cognitive dissonance. Right, cognitive dissonance is that super uncomfortable feeling you get when your actions contradict your beliefs. Your brain hates that contradiction. So think back. After you've been love-bombed and made to feel so special, and then you sacrifice your family, your job, all your money for the group, well, if you admit the group is bad, you also have to admit that all that sacrifice was a huge, catastrophic mistake. It's psychologically so much easier to get rid of that tension by just changing your belief. This group must be incredible because look at everything I've given up for it. The psychologist who came up with this theory, Leon Festinger, he put it pretty bluntly, and in this twisted logic, the suffering itself becomes a tool of commitment. It's a paradox, right? The hardship actually makes the devotion even stronger. And this internal commitment, it gets reinforced by a worldview that divides everything into black and white. Lifton called it the dispensing of existence. The in-group, us, we have the ultimate truth. The out-group, which is the entire rest of the world, is lost, they're evil, they're unenlightened. This makes the idea of leaving absolutely terrifying. It's not just leaving a community, it's leaving salvation itself and becoming one of them. So why does understanding this whole playbook actually matter? Because these mechanisms of control, this psychology of power, they are not limited to some fringe groups living out on a remote commune. They are all around us. Let's go back to Sarah Edmondson for a second. She says this isn't really about the word cult, it's about abuses of power. The isolation, the us versus them thinking, the charismatic leader who can't be questioned. I mean, these dynamics can show up in a toxic workplace, in a political movement, even inside an abusive relationship. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question. Looking at all these mechanisms of control, it should really force us to look inward. Every single one of us is part of groups with shared beliefs. So, understanding how these systems work, it gives us the tools to ask ourselves, which of my own beliefs are truly mine, and which ones have I just accepted without question?